Somewhere along the way, faith lost its depth. It stopped being a living, breathing experience and became something blind, rigid, and unquestioned. People began to trade curiosity for certainty, replacing real spiritual awakening with memorized beliefs and borrowed convictions. Alan Watts warned that when we cling to an idea without ever examining it, we lose our connection to the very truth we seek. So ask yourself, have you ever believed something simply because you were told to, not because you felt it echo in the deepest chambers of your being? That subtle discomfort you feel when doubt enters the room might not be weakness. It might be the beginning of awakening. Blind faith is seductive because it promises simplicity in a world filled with complexity. It tells you what to think, how to behave, and who to be, relieving you of the uncomfortable task of questioning reality. But what's insisted that true spirituality is not obedience, is awareness. It is the courage to look into the unknown and ask, who am I beyond what I've been taught? When faith becomes a shield against doubt instead of a bridge toward understanding, it stops expanding consciousness and begins imprisoning it. Suddenly, life becomes a series of rehearsed answers instead of a lived experience. Yet doubt is not your enemy. It is a sacred invitation. When you suppress your questions, something inside you goes silent. Your intuition, your inner voice, your direct connection to the divine becomes muffled beneath the noise of secondhand beliefs. What's believed that awakening is experiential. You cannot inherit enlightenment. You must taste it yourself. Real faith is not blindness. It's a deep trust that includes your doubts, fears, and contradictions. It's the willingness to explore the mystery instead of hiding from it. Imagine, for a moment, a flower forcing itself to bloom faster because others demanded it. It would tear itself apart. That's what blind faith does to the soul. It demands certainty before growth, answers before introspection, and obedience before authenticity. True awakening, on the other hand, unfolds naturally, like petals opening to sunlight. It doesn't rush, it doesn't fear questions, and it doesn't shame curiosity. It invites you to experience truth directly, not through the borrowed eyes of others. So as we begin this journey together, consider this. Perhaps the discomfort you feel in your beliefs is not rebellion, but evolution. Perhaps the voice whispering, "There must be more," is not doubt, but awakening. And maybe the greatest act of spiritual courage is not believing harder, but seeing deeper. Blind faith often begins in innocence. We inherit beliefs the way we inherit family traditions, passed down through generations, wrapped in reverence, and rarely questioned. But as Alan Watts pointed out, when belief becomes inheritance instead of discovery, we confuse comfort for truth. Rather than exploring our inner landscape, we cling to someone else's map, afraid that wandering beyond its borders will leave us lost. Yet the soul was not designed to be confined. It yearns to explore, to doubt, to question. Curiosity is not a betrayal of faith. It is the doorway to awakening. What's taught that real spirituality is experiential. It cannot be memorized like scripture or repeated like a ritual. It must be lived, breathed, and felt with the entire being. Blind faith, however, discourages experience. It says, trust this. Do not look deeper. It creates boundaries around questions, making inquiry feel like sin. And in doing so, it silences the very impulses that lead to transformation. Faith without exploration is like reading a menu without ever tasting the food. You may know the words, but you'll never feel the flavor. The tragedy is that many fear their own doubt. They believe that questioning is rebellion, a threat to spiritual stability. But what's believed doubt is essential. Doubt loosens the grip of unconscious beliefs, making space for authentic understanding. Without doubt, faith becomes superstition. With doubt, faith becomes awareness. When you examine your beliefs, not out of arrogance but curiosity, you begin to differentiate between what was planted in you and what grew from you. That distinction is the birth of awakening. Blind faith also creates a false sense of security. It suggests that if you simply repeat the rituals and obey the rules, life will protect you from uncertainty. But life is not a contract. It is a dance. The dance includes joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion, connection and separation. What's would say that clinging too tightly to certainty prevents you from moving fluidly with life's natural rhythms. Ironically, the tighter you hold on, the more life must shake you to help you let go. And yet, something extraordinary happens when you allow yourself to question. You stop living through borrowed beliefs and begin to feel the pulse of your own spirit. You shift from dependency to sovereignty. You begin to taste life directly instead of through translation. This is not rebellion. It is remembrance. It is the recognition that faith isn't meant to blind you. It's meant to guide you into deeper seeing, where truth becomes a felt experience rather than a repeated phrase. One of the subtle traps of blind faith is its insistence on external authority. We look to leaders, institutions, and doctrines to tell us who we are and how to live. But Watts warned that when you outsource your inner knowing, you become a stranger to yourself. It's like standing outside your own home, asking others to describe the rooms inside. Their words may be poetic, but they will never replace first-hand experience. True spirituality begins the moment you dare to walk into the house of your soul, unescorted, unfiltered, and unafraid. External authority thrives on certainty. It offers you neat answers wrapped in conviction, reducing mystery into doctrine. But real awakening is messy. It is full of contradictions, paradoxes, and moments where everything you believe dissolves. What's taught that this dissolution is sacred? Identity must crumble to reveal essence. If you cling to beliefs that never bend, you may never notice the life trying to grow through the cracks. The discomfort you feel when beliefs break is not crisis, it is growth. Every ending frees space for expansion. When blind faith replaces awakening, spirituality becomes performance. People repeat phrases they don't understand, recite prayers without presence, and worship symbols rather than truth. They begin to confuse appearance with alignment. What's called this the trap of pretended spirituality, a facade that looks enlightened but fears authenticity. Real spirituality does not demand that you appear awake. It invites you to actually wake up, even if that means dismantling everything you thought you knew. This dismantling often begins with a simple question. Is this mine? Is this belief something you feel in your bones? Or was it handed to you with an expectation attached? When you ask this sincerely, illusions begin to fall away. You will discover beliefs that once felt like truth, but were merely comfort. Letting them go may feel like betrayal, but it is actually a return to yourself. What's insisted that true spirituality cannot imprison you. Anything that keeps you small or afraid is not divine. It is conditioning wearing sacred clothing. As you peel back these layers, something profound appears. Silence. Not empty silence, but alive silence. The space where intuition awakens. In this quiet, you realize you've been searching for answers outside when your deepest knowing has been whispering inside all along. Blind faith taught you to ignore this voice. Awakening teaches you to listen. And when you do, you realize you were never meant to follow someone else's path. Your journey is uniquely yours, shaped by the questions only you are brave enough to ask. As this inner silence grows familiar, you begin to notice something extraordinary. Your relationship to truth changes. Rather than clinging to a single, fixed belief, you start to explore truth as an unfolding experience. Alan Watts taught that truth is like the horizon, always present, yet always shifting depending on where you stand. Blind faith tries to capture the horizon in a bottle, turning mystery into doctrine. But awakening understands that truth breathes. It moves. It evolves with you. To freeze it is to kill it. This realization can be unsettling at first, but eventually, it becomes liberating. It means you're allowed to grow beyond what you once believed. Blind faith often demands certainty. It insists on answers and punishes questions. But certainty, Watts warned, is a dangerous illusion. The tighter you cling to it, the more fragile you become. Life will introduce contradictions that challenge your rigidity, and instead of expanding, you may break. Awakening teaches you to embrace uncertainty as part of the human experience. It invites you to sit with questions, not as threats, but as doorways. Every doubt becomes an invitation to deeper understanding. Every contradiction an opportunity to dissolve the ego's limits. The ego, you'll notice, thrives on blind faith. It loves being right. It loves certainty. It loves the comfort of belonging to a group that confirms its beliefs. But awakening exposes the ego's tricks. It shows you that righteousness is often fear in disguise. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being alone. Fear of the unknown. What's called this the trap of identity. When your worth depends on the stability of your beliefs, any question feels like a personal attack. But when you realize you are not your beliefs, you discover a freedom that cannot be shaken. This freedom manifests as curiosity. You begin to explore ideas not through the lens of fear, but through the lens of wonder. You no longer defend beliefs, you investigate them. You hold them gently, knowing they may evolve. And because you're no longer threatened by change, change becomes your teacher instead of your enemy. What's taught that life is flow. To resist flow is to suffer. Awakening means learning to float instead of drowning, learning to trust the river rather than gripping the bank. The more you practice this openness, the more you realize that truth cannot be owned. It can only be experienced. You stop trying to win arguments and start seeking understanding. You stop needing others to approve of your journey because the journey itself becomes your validation. This quiet confidence emerges not from blind certainty, but from direct experience, the type of knowing that cannot be memorized or inherited, only lived. As your awareness expands, you begin to see the subtle ways blind faith limits connection. When people cling rigidly to beliefs, conversation becomes combat. Each person tries to convert rather than understand, defend rather than listen. But awakening births compassion. What's believed that when you recognize the divine in yourself, you naturally begin to see it in others. You no longer need to prove you're right because you no longer fear being wrong. Truth becomes a shared exploration rather than a battlefield. This softens your relationships, allowing deeper intimacy and honest dialogue. Blind faith often divides, creating insiders and outsiders. Awakening dissolves this separation. You begin to realize that the spiritual journey is universal, even if its expressions differ. What's taught that religions are like different languages, diverse ways of expressing the same indescribable mystery. When you see this, you stop judging others for their path and start appreciating the unique ways truth finds them. Instead of walls, you build bridges. Instead of fear, you cultivate understanding. That shift alone begins to awaken love without condition. This newfound compassion also extends inward. Blind faith tends to judge. It labels thoughts as sinful, emotions as wrong, and questions as dangerous. But awakening allows you to hold yourself gently. It teaches you that every emotion is a messenger, every fear a doorway, every shadow a part of your wholeness. What would say that enlightenment is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming real. When you stop rejecting parts of yourself, life stops feeling like a battle. You discover peace in your own skin. And in this peace, something miraculous happens. Your intuition begins to guide you clearly. Blind faith speaks loudly through fear and obligation. Awakening whispers softly through alignment. You begin to feel the difference between what you were told to believe and what your soul knows is true. Decisions become easier because they are rooted in authenticity, not expectation. What's insisted that real spirituality returns you to yourself, not the self built by society, but the self beneath all masks. As this authentic self emerges, your relationship to the divine transforms. You no longer fear God as an external authority. You begin to experience God as presence, the breath in your lungs, the pulse in your chest, the stillness behind your thoughts. It's not belief anymore, it's intimacy. And once you have tasted that intimacy, blind faith loses its appeal. You can no longer live on borrowed truth because you have felt something real, something alive, something that cannot be captured by doctrine or controlled by fear. It's in that moment you realize, awakening wasn't about learning something new. It was about remembering something ancient. As your inner world transforms, you begin to see how blind faith relies heavily on external structure. Rituals, rules, and rigid traditions become scaffolding that hold up belief. But Alan Watts pointed out that structure without spirit becomes hollow, like a beautifully carved cup with nothing inside it. Many cling to rituals hoping they will provide meaning, but meaning cannot be found in repetition alone. Real awakening transforms the heart, not just the habit. Ritual becomes powerful only when it flows from awareness, not obligation. If the cup is empty, pouring more rules into it will not fill the soul. This realization often creates tension within you. On one hand, stepping beyond rigid beliefs brings liberation. On the other, it threatens the identity you build around them. What's called this the fear of freedom. Freedom sounds desirable until you realize it leaves no one to blame, no authority to hide behind, no doctrine to shield your insecurities. Awakening demands responsibility. The responsibility to listen to your inner truth, to face your shadows, and to question your motivations. Blind faith may feel safer, but safety is a poor substitute for authenticity. As you shed these layers, you might find yourself grieving, not because you lost truth, but because you lost certainty. Certainty can feel comforting even when it imprisons you. Watts taught that clinging to certainty is like closing your fist around water. You end up with less. The uncertainty that rises during awakening is not a void. It is fertile space. It is the ground where real understanding grows. This space invites creativity, intuition, and personal revelation. It says, you do not need to be told what is sacred. Feel what is sacred. In this fertile space, you begin to experience spirituality through direct contact. Stillness becomes sacred. Compassion becomes worship. Presence becomes prayer. You realize that the divine is not confined to temples or books. It is woven into every breath, every moment, every heartbeat. What's believed the sacred was never separate from everyday life. It was simply overlooked. By opening your awareness, you begin to sense the divine in unexpected places, in silence, in laughter, in solitude, in pain. Life becomes the altar, awareness becomes the ritual. And as your awareness sharpens, you notice that what once frightened you now fascinates you. Questions no longer feel like threats, they feel like keys. Mystery no longer paralyzes, it inspires. You begin to trust that truth is not weakened by inquiry, it is illuminated by it. Blind faith fears the unknown, awakening befriends it. And slowly, without forcing anything, the prison door of certainty swings open, revealing a world far larger, richer, and more alive than you ever imagined. With this expanded perception, something profound shifts in how you relate to pain. Blind faith often views pain as punishment, a consequence of disobedience or divine displeasure. But awakening teaches that pain is a messenger. Watts compared pain to the ringing of a bell, signaling that something within you requires attention, presence, or change. Avoiding pain through ritual or denial only numbs the lesson. When you face it consciously, pain becomes transformative. It softens the ego, deepens empathy, and opens pathways to wisdom that comfort alone could never teach. As you allow yourself to feel pain rather than escape it, you realize how much of blind faith was built on fear of suffering. People cling to belief not because it awakens them, but because it promises protection from the unpleasant. However, Watts taught that to be alive is to feel fully, to embrace the beauty and the ache without running from either. Awakening does not numb you. It sensitizes you. It teaches you that the heart's cracks are not flaws. They are openings where light can enter. This openness brings with it a curious paradox. The more you embrace discomfort consciously, the less it controls you. Blind faith tends to suppress emotional complexity, labeling certain feelings as wrong. Awakening sees emotion as weather, temporary expressions of deeper truths. You learn to watch your thoughts and feelings without drowning in them. You realize that you are not the storm. You are the sky that holds the storm. That shift alone can dissolve years of fear. Watts would say that peace is not found by avoiding turbulence, but by remembering you are the space it moves through. As this emotional intelligence grows, your compassion expands exponentially. You begin to see others not as right or wrong, saved or lost, enlightened or naive, but as mirrors revealing aspects of yourself. Blind faith separates. Awakening connects. When you meet someone trapped in fear, you feel tenderness rather than superiority. When you see someone clinging to certainty, you recognize a past version of yourself. This recognition dissolves judgment and replaces it with empathy. What's believed that we are all expressions of the same universal consciousness, different waves rising from the same ocean. And then, something even more unexpected unfolds. You stop seeking spiritual validation altogether. You no longer need to prove your beliefs, defend your path, or convert anyone. The journey becomes deeply personal, deeply intuitive, and deeply alive. What's called this the great letting go. Rather than clinging to belief, you relax into being. Instead of worshiping truth, you embody it. And in that embodiment, you discover a peace that blind faith never gave you. A peace rooted in presence, awareness, and the quiet knowing that you are part of something vast, sacred, and endlessly unfolding. As your awareness stabilizes, you begin to recognize how blind faith can become a subtle escape from responsibility. It allows people to hand their power over to doctrine, destiny, or divine will, instead of participating in their own becoming. Alan Watts warned that passivity disguised as spirituality is merely avoidance. It is the refusal to engage with life's complexities under the comforting illusion that everything will work out without your involvement. But awakening teaches that you are both the wave and the ocean, part of a divine process, yet responsible for how you move through it. You are not merely acted upon, you are a co-creator. In this realization, you begin to reclaim your agency. Instead of praying for circumstances to change, you ask for clarity to act. Instead of waiting for signs, you become aware of the subtle intuitions already guiding you. What's believed that true faith is not passive hope, but active trust, a surrender that moves, breathes, and responds. Hope can keep you still and longing. Trust inspires you to step into uncertainty with open eyes. And in that step, you discover that life guides those who participate, not those who wait. This shift also transforms how you perceive miracles. Blind faith expects miracles to arrive externally, as sudden blessings that erase struggle. Awakening reveals that miracles often arrive internally first, as shifts in perspective, unexplainable peace, or intuitive clarity. They are not interruptions of natural law, but expressions of it. What's taught that the miraculous is not beyond nature, it is woven into it. When you raise your awareness, life seems suddenly filled with synchronicity, guidance, and invisible support. What you once called coincidence becomes connection. Yet, awakening doesn't promise comfort. It asks you to stand in your naked truth, stripped of borrowed beliefs. This vulnerability can feel frightening, but it is where authenticity is born. Without masks, you begin to speak from your soul rather than your conditioning. What's described this as coming home, returning to your intrinsic nature without pretending. People may question the changes in you. Some may distance themselves. But you do not shrink because your foundation is no longer external approval. It is internal alignment. And slowly, without forcing anything, you begin to taste a freedom far deeper than certainty. A freedom that allows you to change your mind, evolve your beliefs, and grow beyond yesterday's truths. Where blind faith once demanded loyalty, awakening invites fluidity. You are no longer confined by doctrine. You are guided by presence. You stop worshiping the finger pointing to the moon and finally look directly at the moon itself. In that glance, everything changes, not because truth arrived, but because you finally noticed it was always there. As you settle into this awakened state, the world around you appears both familiar and transformed. Not because reality changed, but because your perception did. Blind faith once narrowed your vision, filtering life through rigid beliefs. Awakening widens your gaze, allowing you to see the sacred woven quietly into ordinary moments. Alan Watts believed enlightenment was not an escape from life, but a deeper participation in it. Instead of chasing the extraordinary, you begin to notice the miraculous pulsing through the mundane, in breath, in silence, in presence. In this awareness, fear loses its authority. Blind faith used fear as a boundary, punishing questions, condemning doubt. Awakening uses fear as a compass, pointing to the places within you asking for integration. You no longer run from fear. You listen to it. Fear becomes information, not condemnation. What's taught that fear is the sensation of growth, the trembling edge where life invites you to step forward. When you accept fear as part of the dance, it no longer interrupts your rhythm. It sharpens it. This evolution also transforms your relationship with death. Not only physical death, but the many small deaths that life requires. Old identities die. Old beliefs die. Old versions of yourself dissolve. Blind faith mourns these endings, but awakening honors them. Watts compared death to the pause between heartbeats, necessary for the next beat to emerge. Without these endings, you cannot evolve. And when you embrace them, you begin to live more fully, unafraid of shedding what no longer aligns. Eventually, you recognize that awakening is not a destination. It is not achieved once and held forever. It is a continuous unfolding, a spiral that deepens each time you return to yourself. Watts emphasized that life is a process, not a prize. The moment you believe you are done, you begin to stagnate. Awakening is willingness. Willingness to learn, to question, to break, to rebuild. Faith becomes less about holding answers and more about honoring the mystery. And in that mystery, you find peace. At last, you stand in a truth most never reach. Real spirituality doesn't blind you. It wakes you up. It doesn't demand obedience. It inspires awareness. It doesn't silence doubt. It transforms it into curiosity. Blind faith gives you borrowed eyes. Awakening returns your own vision. And once you have seen through those eyes, you can no longer pretend to be asleep. You realize you were never searching for God outside of yourself. You were searching for the awareness capable of recognizing the divine within. When you look back at this journey, you begin to realize that what you once called faith was often only fear wearing sacred clothing. It demanded obedience, but offered little understanding. Yet the moment you allowed yourself to question, something ancient stirred within you. Alan Watts would say that awakening begins the moment you stop believing about truth and start experiencing truth directly. Every doubt you once buried became a seed, pushing through the soil of your consciousness, cracking open the walls built by tradition, and inviting light into places that have been dark for years. And in that light, you discovered a simple, liberating revelation. You were never meant to be blind. You were meant to see. As your inner vision opened, certainty melted into curiosity. The doctrines you clutched so tightly loosened their grip, not because you rejected them, but because you finally understood them. Spirituality stopped being a script and became a conversation between your soul and the divine. The walls between sacred and ordinary fell away, and life itself became your teacher. Watts taught that when the seeker disappears, the sought appears, meaning that awakening unfolds when you stop chasing belief and start embodying awareness. In that embodiment, you found honesty, humility, and the courage to stand alone if needed. For the first time, faith felt alive. This aliveness changed how you saw others. You no longer judged their path or defended your own. Instead, you recognized a universal rhythm beating beneath every story, a rhythm of searching, learning, forgetting, and remembering. Blind faith divides by fear. Awakening unites through compassion. Suddenly, you saw yourself reflected in everyone you once misunderstood. That reflection softened your heart, and in that softness, you discovered truth more powerful than any doctrine. Love is the lens through which the divine becomes visible. It cannot be memorized. It must be lived. And now, as you stand at this threshold, something inside you has quietly shifted. The questions that once terrified you now guide you. The uncertainty you avoided has become a sacred space where intuition speaks. The divine no longer feels distant, because you feel it pulsing through your awareness in every breath. This is the essence of awakening, not arriving at a final answer, but learning how to listen deeply. Watts would remind you that life is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be participated in. When you embrace that, every moment becomes prayer. If this message awakens something inside you, a spark of recognition, a breath of clarity, a new question forming in the quiet, don't ignore it. Let it deepen, Let it guide you, and share your reflection below. Your perspective may become the mirror someone else needs. And if you feel called to walk further into this conversation, remember to subscribe, like this video, and leave your voice in the comments. Together, we can explore not just what we believe, but who we become when we finally open our eyes.